This video is brought to you by the lovely guys over at Robotoys. For all your Hasbro, Takara, third-party and knockoff desires, Robotoys has you covered. For 10% off, use the code DrLockdown 10% off at the checkout. Now on to today's diagnosis.
Read the disclaimer! On the other one, you bastard!
Greetings Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and welcome to part 4 of Seacons Week! Discourse for what the worst Seacon of the bunch is very much rampant online, but there are two main candidates that seem to rise up from that discussion, and unfortunately neither of them are Kraken. What is with everyone? The first is quite obvious, given the toy that it's based on, and the second is surprisingly old Lobclaw over here. At first I was somewhat confused. How could a figure this adorable be the most hated Seacon of the bunch? But then that does bring up the question, is a singular flaw enough to completely damn a figure? Whilst it is true for a lot of figures, let's take a look and see if it applies to this one in particular. Much like his name implies, Lobclaw transforms into a lobster, and he's f***ing adorable! The American counterpart, Nautilator, is described as a bit of a loser who can't even swim properly. And oddly enough, that design echoes that exceptionally well. The oversized head to the squishy claws to the tiny tail at the back, he's cute as f***. As a standalone beast mode, honestly I feel this is the most satisfying of the bunch so far, and easily my favourite out of the whole set by far. The head sculpt is painted amazingly, with a ton of black and turquoise and, once again, piercing yellow eyes. It's a little bit difficult to get it to lock into place when going from robot to lobster, but once it's in there, it remains rock solid. You even get the return of the red paint on the inside of the mouth, something which was sorely missing from Gulf. Very nice touch, and adds to his adorability. The body section is surprisingly clean, given all the parts that move around. At the very least, it's cleaner than Kraken, thank f*** for that. You do get a couple of gaps around the leg struts here, but honestly I don't think it's that big of a deal. Considering the excellent paint and sculpt work on the rest of the body, I can easily let it slide. It's almost impossible to tell, but much like Gulf, this guy's a retool of Blot. Many of the parts he shares have been switched around, and the entire transformation system is different. But unlike Gulf, he does retain one key element, the arm transformation. Although not as clever as the claw wraparound elements we saw in the original, Lobclaw's claws are still very well realized. Much like the original, he can kind of fake a claw snap, but it does reveal part of the robot fist, so I wouldn't really recommend it. Still, despite the rest of the robot being a brick with nothing but a singular leg hinge to help that fact, the arms are incredibly posable with two separate ball joints, which will become the robot arms later, obviously. Considering the front section is what draws most of the attention, this little posability element does wonders for the design. However, there is one flaw that does make everyone despise this mode. The legs don't lock in at all. Now, to a certain extent, this is somewhat understandable. Considering they can't retool every single piece of the whole damn thing, they do have to leave the chest as is. As such, there's really no place for the legs to plug into. So all they can really do is have the lobster legs roughly sit in these grooves that were on the original design by pure coincidence. The original block mold doesn't use these for the purpose of combination, it just uses them for the purposes of aesthetics. They simply had to do what they could with the shit they had, and you know what? How they attempted to fix this issue is commendable. That said, I do kinda understand the frustration. They might have been better to utilize the ports on the side instead without going too far over budget, especially for the price tag. So at the end of the day, do I think this is a substantial enough issue to down the entire figure? No, but it is a nitpick that cannot be ignored. That said, I still think this lobster mode is pretty damn awesome. I mean, to be fair, are you really gonna have this guy in any dynamic poses? Aside from the arms, he's pretty much a brick, so it doesn't really matter. Anyway, accessory time. First off, you get a gun with a bunch of ports on it. Fortunately, it looks a lot better than Kraken's abysmal gun, even though there isn't any paint to pick out the details. You can stick it on the top, and honestly, it doesn't look too bad. Maybe just because the head looks so cool, so it actively makes the gun placement feel natural. Next we have the axe, which is another one of the trident combination weapons, and this is easily the weakest out of that specific set. It's not terrible by any means, but the connection port on the top is incredibly distracting. Still, much like Gulf, you can utilize the Prime Master port on the bottom for storage. It sadly doesn't go all the way in thanks to the tabs on the backs of the lobster legs, but it does stay in well enough and remains completely hidden from almost any angle. The tail is also a parts-forming accessory, and this works far better than the one Gulf had, but I'll get to that later when discussing the robot mode. Finally, you get another combiner hand, and although it is still awesome, the storage is easily the weakest of the bunch so far. Well, off to the storage drawer you go. Size-wise, he actually does have slightly more heft to him than most other combiner limbs, thanks to the inclusion of the extra tail, larger legs, and retooled head and arms. I don't think this needs saying, but he easily outclasses the original Blot mold in this mode. No contest whatsoever. Out of all the Seacons, Lobclaw is probably the closest to your average combiner limb that you're going to get in terms of transformation, but at the very least we do get a very good design out of it. First thing you want to do is remove the weapon. Oh no, weapon parts forming, except this time it actually locks together properly. No wobbliness issues whatsoever. Why couldn't Gulf be like this? Seriously, I don't get it. Then there's a peg there and a slot there, and you want to disconnect that from that, although there's no actual connection. And that actually locks into place, which is a very nice touch in comparison to what the Lobster mode was like. And surprisingly, those tabs served no purpose on the original Bloss mold, so the fact that they managed to use it here, it's a happy coincidence. If you've been using the weapon storage, you want to move that section up, open up these back leg sections, and do the whole Combiner Wars style leg transformation with the 2 pegs there and the 2 slots there, and make sure it doesn't wobble down. Just gently, 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 in it locks. There we go. And then the Lobster legs kind of form a cage around here, and you disconnect the legs. Rotate the torso 180 degrees. Bring the arms down like so. Fold the inner claw into the outer claw, similarly to how Bloss transformed. It was really cool on the original Bloss figure, so it's nice that we're at least getting something similar here. Bring the entire Lobster head back, and at this point I actually like to keep the mouth a bit open, so it just creates a little bit of visual variety in the robot mode. But then you kind of accordion it inwards so that that folds over there, and make sure the head's around, of course. And here we are, a very simple transformation, but oh, is it worth it? In Robots mode, Lobclaw is most definitely a looker. The colour layout and choices are absolutely inspired. The very same grey that looked bland as f*** on Kraken now looks pristine on Lobclaw, which seems kind of impossible, but hey, it's a thing. The arms transform from appropriately pudgy to insanely sharp. It's an inspired choice, even if out of necessity, due to the mold they're using, and goes way beyond the G1 way of doing things, which is just stick it on the back. The legs aren't the cleanest of the bunch, but something about the bold nature of the Lobster legs just does it for me. They make a statement, and after a while, you don't really get bothered by it. Plus, thankfully, they don't get in the way of the articulation, so that's a plus. Then there's the head sculpt, which is by far the most gorgeous head sculpt of the whole set. The perfect combination of angled yet squared helmet, giant V forehead, and wonderful gold paint on the mouthplate make this a truly amazing design. One problem, though, it's loose as shit. It's weird too, it wasn't like this out of the box at all. Only after leaving it on a shelf for about a week did it suddenly become incredibly floppy. I'm sure it's fixable, and if any part has to be loose, then the head is probably the least intrusive, but it's just so weird. Some people have claimed that poor Lobclaw is the worst of the set thanks to this specific looseness and the lack of tabs for the Lobster legs, but honestly I don't think it's that big of a deal. It's a beautiful piece regardless, and I couldn't be happier with how this design turned out. Accessory-wise, the gun from earlier returns, and it's a gun alright. It looks fine, but honestly we've been spoiled in mainline with the weapons we've got recently, ignoring the Micromaster weapon modes. The axe looks just as ridiculous as it did earlier, but hey, it's a massive step up above the alternative, so I'm perfectly fine with it. And finally, you get his tail gun, which honestly is how they should have handled Gulf's. This one doesn't have any tabbing issues, and to be honest, it actually looks kinda cool. I don't mind parts forming weapons at all. It's just that this is how you do it right. But to be honest, considering how his arms are literal claws, there doesn't really seem to be a need for weapons. He can use his forearm knives to beat the shit out of you, or transform him into claw mode and crush your head. A lot of weapon options. Me likey. Articulation remains the same as Gulf, considering they're both retools of the Blot mold. In comparison to said mold, yeah, they both easily outclass it once again. And size-wise, it's a Prime Wars Combine Limb Deluxe. I'm not quite sure what you were expecting here. Leg mode is middle of the road. It mostly looks nice, and I really like how the arms actually peg into the sides of the head. Honestly, I didn't think they'd be able to peg in anywhere at all. Nice touch. The use of the tail mass is also quite lovely. Unfortunately, though, it is quite gappy from the side. It's nice that it looks alright in general, but it's obviously not the best configuration. Fortunately, the arm mode fares better. Yes, you still have to tend with a teeny bit of hollowness, but overall it's not terrible and it's definitely a step up. The arms are a bit gaudy though. I will say, I do like that they didn't try to hide the Lobster legs. They actually look kinda cool without ruining the profile of the arm. That said, the gun storage is awful. It completely ruins the shoulder mass. You don't even get anywhere to put the other gun, in this or leg mode for that matter. Fortunately, I've figured out a way to keep it hidden though, at least from the front. Thankfully, the ports keeping the robot arms in place, although solid, have just enough leeway to pull this off. And then we get the Target Master mode, and honestly, I don't know how he keeps sinking to new lows with how bad these look. Compared to the others, this seems to be the worst so far. Does it ruin the figure? No, but again, I don't really see the obsession with sea creatures turning into guns. It seems pretty f***ing ridiculous. But even with the disappointing leg and gun modes, in my eyes, Lobclaw is easily the best of the entire set, even including Turslo. Why he's so hated is completely baffling to me, especially considering he's the only figure that truly works on his own merits and not just as a combiner. It's just unfortunate that due to the circumstances of his creation, he likely won't get a second chance, whereas everyone else will. See, if we're taking the promotional comics as evidence, it's likely that at some point Takara will make a God Neptune. And what's the one member that they leave out with God Neptune? It's the redeco of Lobclaw. So everyone else gets a redeco except Lobclaw over here, which is massively disappointing. So with that being considered, if you happen to see a full set, grab it. And if you happen to see Lobclaw on his own, grab him, even if you're not interested in the full Seacons lineup, I suppose. This adorable bastard deserves a spot in your collection. So, if he comes back into stock later, I suggest picking him up at today's sponsor, Robotoys. They specialize in Hasbro, Takara, third-party, and knockoff figures, so if you haven't already, make sure to use the code DrLock 10% off at the checkout for 10% off any individual purchase. It's a one-time use code. That said, it's unlikely Takara will reissue these individually. If they reissue them, they will be in a box set. But if they do, well, Lobclaw's easily the best of the bunch, and I'm glad to have him. But with that said, I got some more videos to work on, so I'll see you tomorrow.
Lobclaw, Lobclaw, No, no, エビエビハサミかざしてはいじゃん